There's something unsettling about the void, the way space stretches endlessly in every direction. An ocean of darkness so vast, it swallows all light, all sound, all sense of time. It's easy to feel small out there, insignificant. But what if the void wasn't as empty as we thought? What if, lurking somewhere in the deep shadows between the stars, there was something waiting? Something ancient watching us with an intelligence that's beyond our comprehension. A presence that doesn't belong in our reality, something that's been there for ages, waiting for someone to notice. Imagine staring out into that blackness, through the thick glass of a spaceship window, knowing the only thing keeping you safe is a thin layer of metal, and then catching the faintest glimmer just at the edge of your vision. A light, a reflection, or maybe something else. You turn to your crewmates, wondering if they saw it too, but you hesitate, wondering if it's even real, or just your mind playing tricks on you in the silence. But then, that light, it moves. Slowly, deliberately, and in that instant a chill races down your spine and you understand whatever it is, it's aware of you. In space, every sound, every flicker of light carries a message, a warning. You can't shake the feeling that this darkness holds secrets that humans were never meant to uncover. We went up there to explore, to uncover mysteries of the cosmos, driven by the promise of discovery. But sometimes what we find defies reason, bending the limits of what we can endure, of what we can believe. Out there, where no one can hear you, where there is no place to run, you start to wonder if some mysteries were meant to stay hidden. Because in the shadows of space, where silence and darkness blend, something waits, something that doesn't belong in our world. And once you encounter it, you'll never look at the night sky the same way again. I've been with SpaceX for years. I've seen the countless steps, the rigor and precision it takes to get a crew safely off the ground, soaring toward the unknown. I was part of the team from the beginning, watching as we made history, pushing the limits of human exploration further and further. Each mission has its own rhythm, a checklist of hundreds of meticulous procedures, every step vital, every decision calculated down to the last decimal. It's intense, but there's a thrill to it, a rush you can't find anywhere else. To be in that control room, guiding a mission, knowing that at that very moment, people are drifting above the world, surrounded by nothing but the void, it's an experience that doesn't leave you. But this time, this mission, it felt different from the start. We weren't heading to the ISS, and this wasn't a routine orbital trip. We'd been assigned a high-orbit investigation, one that would push beyond our usual range. High-orbit missions were rare, and when they did happen, they were often accompanied by tight security and vague objectives. We were told very little. Just a few coded messages hinting at something unusual detected in a region just beyond our standard reach. Something the company needed eyes on but couldn't or wouldn't explain further. My team and I were briefed quickly, told to follow our training and handle whatever came our way with the same professionalism we always did. But even as I sat there monitoring the readouts and running diagnostics, there was a strange tension in the air, a quiet unease. One of the crewmates, a seasoned astronaut, steady as they come, leaned over and asked, "Have you ever had a launch brief this sparse?" We shared a look, one that said everything without a word. We both knew something was off. Then there was the equipment. It was unusual, a bulky, black device tucked into the side of the craft's cargo bay, with no visible controls, no clear indicators of what it was designed to do. We hadn't been briefed on its purpose, and it wasn't listed in any of the pre-launch manifests. Just there, as if it had appeared at the last minute, a silent passenger on board our craft. When I asked about it, the mission coordinator gave me a dismissive response, brushing it off as classified and advising us to just leave it be. I've seen a lot of equipment come and go, but this was different, too sleek, too secret, and somehow wrong. It gave off a faint hum, barely noticeable unless you were close. But there was a sense about it, like it didn't belong. The team was trained to focus on the task at hand, to ignore distractions and stick to protocol. But in that moment, every one of us could feel it, an almost instinctive feeling of hesitation, like we were being pulled towards something we didn't fully understand. We were being asked to confront something out there in the endless darkness with no idea of what awaited. And as we hurtled upward, away from Earth and into the silent black, that question echoed in the back of my mind. Why were we really here? What was so urgent that they would send us this far and tell us so little? The launch was as smooth as any I'd experienced. Engines roaring beneath us, pushing us up, away from the only world we'd ever known. The roar, so deafening and all-encompassing on Earth, gradually faded as we climbed higher, until it was gone. Nothing but the cold, hollow silence of space remained. The kind of silence that presses in on you, makes you realize how isolated you truly are. It's a sound so vast and complete that it's hard to describe, almost like it has a weight to it. As we drifted into high orbit, I checked our systems, ran through diagnostics, and communicated with mission control. The familiar static of the comms channel crackled in my ear, grounding me, a reminder that we weren't entirely alone. But then, as we stabilized, I noticed something unusual on one of the frequencies, just the faintest blip, an odd, erratic hum. I tried to tune it out, to ignore it as background interference, but it didn't go away. It was off in a way I couldn't quite place. The others heard it too, and I saw them exchanging glances, fidgeting with their controls, as if adjusting their equipment would somehow clarify the noise. And then, just like that, it changed. The static shifted, became sharper, broken up into fragmented sounds. A series of clicks, then a low hum, almost like a voice caught mid-sentence but garbled, as if speaking through water. We adjusted our headsets, tweaked the frequency, but it didn't help. Instead, the noise morphed, clicks turning into strange patterns, whispers threading through the static. The sound seemed to loop, repeating fragments over and over in a haunting cadence, a rhythm that felt unnatural. No matter what adjustments we made, it stayed with us like a phantom signal from deep space. We couldn't identify the source. It wasn't coming from Earth, and it didn't match any known transmission patterns. It seemed to be just there, hanging in the emptiness, following us. Every now and then it would rise in volume, as if drawing closer, only to fade back into the whispering static. It was like listening to a conversation you weren't meant to hear, a conversation that wasn't meant for human ears. One of the crew, a quiet, reserved engineer with years of experience, leaned forward, adjusting his headset, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, as though afraid to speak too loudly. "It almost sounds like words." He trailed off, and we all sat in silence, straining to make sense of the disjointed, whispering noise. We couldn't decipher it, but the feeling it gave us was unmistakable, a low, gnawing sense of unease, like someone was whispering secrets we weren't supposed to know. Then, out of nowhere, the signal spiked. It blasted through the comms, a jarring burst of sound that made us all jolt in our seats. It was loud, piercing, and had a strange, almost metallic quality, like a distorted scream. For a moment, everything seemed to pause. No one spoke, no one moved. The only sound was the lingering hum of the machinery and the fading echo of that strange, unnatural noise. At that moment, we all felt something was wrong. I looked at my crewmates, saw the same fear mirrored in their eyes, a fear that none of us wanted to acknowledge. We were trained to handle the unknown, to confront danger with calm and resolve. But this was something else. An instinct buried deep within us, warning us that whatever we had encountered was beyond our control. Our mission had barely begun, and already we felt as though we were trespassing somewhere we didn't belong. The hum of the unidentified device in the cargo bay grew louder, almost as if it was responding to the signal, as if it too sensed something. And that signal, still hanging in the air, faintly pulsing like a heartbeat, wasn't just noise. It was something else entirely, a presence in the void. And for the first time in my career, I felt truly alone, drifting in a darkness that felt alive. We were drifting steadily in orbit, each of us staring out the thick, reinforced glass, scanning the vast emptiness that surrounded us. And then we saw it. A shadow at first, almost blending in with the void, like a trick of the light or some distant satellite. But as we closed in, it took shape, something massive and ancient hovering in the darkness, partially cloaked, as though it didn't want to be seen. The object was like nothing we'd ever encountered, dark and jagged with an alien design that defied logic. It was massive, spanning out with an eerie symmetry that felt unnatural. Its surface was blackened, cold, almost as if it had been scorched by something, and yet it pulsed faintly with a strange, unearthly glow, a dim, pulsating light that seemed to breathe in and out. It radiated a chill, even through the layers of metal and glass separating us from it. Every instinct told us to keep our distance, to leave it be. But our orders were clear: investigate the anomaly. The closer we got, the more we felt it. An oppressive, suffocating presence that filled the cabin. The air, thin and filtered, felt heavier, pressing down on us, constricting our breaths. It wasn't just the object itself, but something surrounding it, an atmosphere of hostility. It felt like the object was aware of us, that it was watching, waiting for us to make the next move. As we drifted nearer, the faint signal we had heard earlier returned, louder now, more distinct, almost like a voice buried in static. Words seemed to form and then dissolve back into noise, a whispering chorus of sounds that grated at our nerves, pulling us deeper into its hold. We tried to contact Mission Control to report the strange object and the bizarre signals, but our communication had begun to distort. The clear, crisp voices from Earth were now garbled, fragmented. It was as if we were caught between two channels, one familiar, the other alien. Voices echoed back through the static, but they weren't ours, and they weren't from Earth. Hollow, distant, they repeated our own words back to us, but twisted, distorted like some dark mockery. The voice of one of my crewmates crackled back over the speakers, only it wasn't him, just a distorted, hollow imitation, repeating phrases he hadn't even spoken. The crew began to panic, eyes darting between the control panels and the looming figure of the object outside. There was an unspoken agreement between us. We needed to find out what this thing was, but every fiber of our being screamed that we shouldn't. The device in our cargo bay, the mysterious, black equipment that had been loaded without explanation, began to hum, vibrating with a rhythm that matched the pulsating glow of the object. It was as though it had been waiting, that it recognized this presence, responding in a silent, chilling dialogue. We activated our lights, illuminating the object's surface, trying to get a closer look. And that's when we saw the details, inscriptions, markings, symbols etched into the dark metal. They looked old, impossibly old, like some ancient language from a time and place we couldn't begin to comprehend. The symbols glowed faintly, pulsing in unison with the device on our ship, each light flickering like a heartbeat. There was something primal about them, something that defied all reason, as though they were reaching out to us, inviting us, or warning us. One of the crew muttered under his breath, "This thing, it shouldn't be here. It feels wrong." And he was right. Everything about this object, this presence, felt like an intrusion into our world, something that didn't belong. We floated there, silent, unable to look away from the symbols, the faint glow, the oppressive, heavy silence that settled over us. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, a cold sweat forming on my brow. The signal crackled again, louder this time, words almost forming, faintly calling like something trapped just beyond our reach. And then there was a sound, a deep, resonant thud, echoing through the ship as if something had touched us, reached out from that ancient object and made contact. We froze, staring at each other, fear flickering in our eyes. In that moment, we knew we were no longer alone. Something was there, something watching, something waiting. I wish I could say we turned back then, that we left that thing behind. But the orders, the equipment, the signals, they were all pushing us forward, leading us into the unknown. We couldn't turn back, even though every instinct told us we should. And as we prepared to board the object, to step inside and face whatever awaited, I knew, deep down, that we had crossed a line we were never meant to cross. But what we found inside was far worse than we ever imagined. We were trained to face the unknown, to be calm in the presence of danger. But this was different. We suited up, preparing to board the object, each of us moving with a deliberate, almost mechanical precision, hiding our fear behind layers of procedure and protocol. I could feel my hands shaking as I reached for the control panel, fingers cold inside the suit. Outside, the alien structure loomed dark and silent, a vast, unmoving shadow against the stars. The surface was sleek, almost unnaturally smooth, save for the faint etchings of those strange symbols, carved deep into the metal. As our craft drew closer, the air inside our cabin grew colder, an unnatural chill seeping through every layer of protection we wore. We attached our tether lines and prepared to make the crossing, a narrow bridge between our world and whatever this was. I could feel the weight of the emptiness, the vastness of space pressing down on us as we left the safety of our ship and drifted toward the alien structure. There was a moment of brief, fleeting hesitation where I nearly pulled back, nearly turned away. But then we crossed the threshold. Stepping onto its surface felt like crossing into another dimension. The temperature dropped sharply, the air inside our helmets fogging up with each breath as we drifted through the airlock and into the structure. It was dark inside, a deep, consuming blackness that swallowed our lights, leaving us feeling as though we were suspended in an endless void. The walls, cold and metallic, felt wrong to the touch, almost alive, pulsing faintly beneath our gloved hands as if the structure itself was breathing, alive in its own, alien way. And then, our lights illuminated what lay within. Bones, piles upon piles of skeletal remains scattered across the floor, brittle and ancient, yet eerily preserved in the frozen stillness. Human? No, these bones were wrong, twisted in unnatural ways with elongated limbs and hollow, empty skulls. Some were small, barely reaching my knee, while others towered, massive and imposing, the remnants of creatures that defied explanation. I felt a shiver run through me, a deep, visceral dread as we walked among them, our footsteps echoing in the empty, cavernous silence. The walls were covered in symbols, cryptic and unsettling, shifting subtly when you tried to focus on them. They seemed to crawl across the metal like living things, twisting and reforming into new shapes, new meanings, always just out of reach. The symbols pulsed with a faint, dim light, illuminating the skeletal remains in a ghastly, unearthly glow. It was as though the walls themselves were alive, whispering in a language older than time, a language that spoke to something buried deep within us, something primal and fearful. The air was thick with a metallic tang, mixed with the faint, lingering stench of decay. I felt a growing nausea as we moved deeper, as though the very air was poisoned, corrupted by centuries of something. My breath echoed loudly in my helmet, each inhale tinged with the scent of rust and something else. It was then that one of the crew stumbled, his hand catching the edge of a wall to steady himself, and as he did, one of the symbols lit up, a sharp, bright glow that cut through the darkness like a blade. The light spread across the wall, illuminating each symbol in turn, casting an eerie glow that filled the chamber. We stood there frozen, the sudden illumination revealing more of the bones, more of the twisted remains scattered around us. And then we heard it. A sound, a low, scraping noise that echoed through the structure, soft at first, but growing louder. It was the sound of something moving closer. It dragged itself across the floor, slow and deliberate, each movement sending a shiver through us, a reminder that we were trespassers here, intruders in a place that was never meant for human eyes. We looked at each other, our breaths shallow, the terror plain on each of our faces. We couldn't see it yet, couldn't pinpoint the source, but we could feel it, a presence, something ancient and alive, stirring in the darkness, reacting to us. My voice barely a whisper, I managed to say. That's when we heard it, the sound of something alive, moving closer. Whatever it was waking up. The sound grew louder, the dragging scrape echoing through the chamber, filling every inch of the space with a noise that was neither human nor animal, something otherworldly, something alive. We stood there paralyzed, feeling the temperature plummet even further, the air growing thick and cloying, as if it was fighting against us, resisting our very presence. Our lights flickered, weakening against an encroaching darkness that seemed to swell from the shadows, pressing in around us. And then we saw it. A shape, or rather, the absence of one, a darkness deeper than black, a moving void that defied all logic, hovering just beyond the edge of our lights. It shifted and pulsed, a massive shadow, its form indistinct, constantly reshaping itself, as if it was struggling to maintain any one shape. It was as if the darkness itself had come alive, an entity made of pure, formless void, moving toward us with a silent, malevolent purpose. Every instinct screamed to run, to get as far from this thing as possible, but we were frozen, trapped in its gaze or whatever it used to perceive us. I felt it, like a physical weight pressing against my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs, as though the very space around us was warping under its influence. My vision blurred, my heart racing so fast I thought it would burst, every sense overwhelmed by a growing, primal terror. The closer it came, the heavier the air felt, thick and foul with the stench of decay, of something rotting, something ancient. Each breath tasted of metal and death, and the pressure in the room was unbearable, as though we were being crushed under a weight we couldn't see. The entity seemed to absorb the light around it, swallowing it whole, leaving only darkness in its wake. I could barely see my own hand in front of me. It was as if the very concept of light was being devoured, leaving us stranded in an endless, consuming void. And then, the shape moved faster, gliding toward us in an unnatural, jerking motion that sent a shiver through me. It felt wrong, as though this entity didn't belong in our world, as though it was bending the laws of reality just to exist here. We staggered back, stumbling over the bones and twisted remains scattered on the floor, feeling them crack beneath our boots. Every step backward felt like we were sinking deeper into something inescapable, a trap that had been set long before we ever arrived. One of my crewmates screamed, his voice echoing hollowly through the chamber, lost in the endless dark. It was enough to break our paralysis. Instinct took over, and we turned, running blindly through the passageways, scrambling toward the exit, toward any chance of escape. The entity followed, gliding after us, silent and relentless, the stench of decay growing stronger with each step, each breath. We could hear it, hear the whispers threading through the darkness, faint and mocking, like echoes of our own voices twisted into something alien. I could feel its presence behind us, a cold that sank into my bones, chilling me to the core, filling my mind with a single, unyielding certainty we wouldn't make it out. This thing didn't want us to leave. It wanted us to stay, to become part of whatever nightmare it inhabited. We reached the airlock, hands fumbling with the controls, desperate to escape, to put distance between ourselves and that creeping darkness. But as we moved, something shifted in the corner of my eye, figures, shadowy and distorted, emerging from the walls, from the bones that littered the floor. They were humanoid, but wrong. Twisted versions of ourselves, mirroring our movements, our expressions, their eyes empty voids that held no life. They watched us, their heads tilted in an unnatural angle, a silent, horrifying reflection of our own fear. I forced myself to look away, focusing on the controls, the airlock finally cycling open, the path back to our ship only steps away. We stumbled through, gasping for breath, feeling the oppressive weight lift slightly, but we couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't truly escaped. That darkness, that presence, it was still with us, lurking just beyond our sight, clinging to our skin like a cold, invisible residue. As we staggered back into our ship, sealing the airlock behind us, I thought we were safe. We collapsed in our seats, panting, trying to regain some semblance of control, some reminder that we were still alive. But then, the lights flickered. Shadows stretched across the walls, twisting into shapes that shouldn't have been there, unnatural, elongated forms that pulsed with a faint, unnatural light. The entity was still with us, as though it had seeped into our ship, merging with the very walls, the very air. We thought we had escaped, but we were horribly wrong. We thought we were safe. We thought that whatever nightmare we had stumbled upon out there, whatever dark, alien presence we had encountered, was behind us. As the airlock closed and sealed, a wave of relief washed over us, as if that thin door could somehow protect us from the unimaginable horrors we had just witnessed. The hum of the ship's machinery sounded comforting, like a lullaby coaxing us back into a fragile sense of security. We each slumped into our seats, exhausted, shaken, but alive. Our first priority was to leave that thing as far behind as possible. We disengaged, watching on the monitor as the alien structure grew smaller, fading back into the shadows from where it had come. There was a moment where we dared to believe that it was over, that we had managed to escape the clutches of something beyond comprehension. But then the silence was broken. It started as a faint crackle over the comms, a static that was familiar yet wrong, reminiscent of the alien signals we'd picked up before. I brushed it off as residual interference, a lingering effect of the equipment's interaction with the object. But then the static grew louder, threading through the cabin like a whisper that none of us could quite catch. It was as if the ship itself was haunted, as if something was still trying to communicate with us from that terrible place we had left behind. I glanced around, hoping to find reassurance in the faces of my crewmates, but something was different. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Their movements seemed slower, stiffer. Their eyes, once full of life and fear, now looked distant, glazed, as though a part of them had been left behind in that structure. I told myself it was the exhaustion, the shock, but the feeling lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind, whispering that something was wrong. And then it happened. One of my crewmates, our engineer, a steady, reliable man I had trusted for years, looked up from his console. He hadn't spoken since we'd returned, his face locked in a rigid, almost frozen expression. But now, his lips twisted into a smile. It wasn't a smile of relief or joy, it was something else entirely. Cold, detached, and in that moment he looked unfamiliar, as though the person I'd known was no longer there. He opened his mouth, and a low, guttural sound came out, a voice that wasn't his. It was deep, layered, with a resonance that defied human speech. He spoke in a language none of us recognized, each syllable twisted and wrong, echoing with an ancient, hollow malice. The words dripped from his lips like poison, filling the cabin with a sense of dread so intense it felt like a physical weight pressing down on us. The rest of the crew turned to look at him, their faces pale, eyes wide, frozen in horror. None of us dared to move, to interrupt this thing that was speaking through him. The engineer's smile grew wider, unnatural, stretching beyond what should have been possible. His eyes, once so familiar, now reflected nothing but darkness, a void that mirrored the shadows we had left behind. He stopped speaking, his mouth still twisted into that eerie smile, his gaze locked onto me. And in that silence, I felt a cold realization creep over me. Whatever we had encountered, whatever ancient, malevolent presence we had disturbed, it was with us. It had followed us back, latched onto us, seeping into our minds, our bodies, turning us into unwilling vessels. I tried to speak, to call out to my crewmates, to break the unnatural stillness that had settled over us, but no sound came. My throat was dry, my chest tight, as though the very air had been tainted by that entity, by the darkness we had unknowingly brought on board. The whispers over the comms grew louder, filling the cabin with a chorus of voices that were not our own, voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. They repeated fragments of our own words, mocking us, twisting them into something unrecognizable, something sinister. My heart raced as the realization sank in, cold and unyielding. I knew then, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that we hadn't escaped. We hadn't left that presence behind, we had carried it with us, unknowingly invited it into our world, our lives. At that moment, I realized we had brought something back to Earth. They say the darkness out there is vast, that it stretches on forever, unbroken, unyielding, holding secrets no human was meant to uncover. When we look up at the stars, we feel awe, curiosity, a thrill at the mystery of it all. But after what we encountered, I no longer look at that darkness the same way. I know now it isn't empty. It isn't silent. Something is out there, something ancient and waiting, hidden just beyond our reach, lying in the spaces between the stars. And we crossed its path. We dared to intrude into its domain, and for that it followed us back. I can feel it, even now, an invisible shadow lingering at the edge of my mind, a cold presence that slips into my thoughts when I least expect it. It doesn't sleep, it doesn't relent, and I fear it doesn't forget. It's always there, lurking in the silence, hiding in the spaces where light cannot reach. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. The faintest whisper, a soft, distant hum that reminds me of that signal, that voice we heard in the void. I'll be alone, surrounded by the safety of four walls, far from that terrible place. And yet, I know it's there, just out of sight, waiting, watching. Maybe we were never meant to know, to understand, to cross into its realm. Perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain in the darkness, untouched, because the truth of what lies out there is far more horrifying than anything we could imagine. It's more than just shadows, more than just the emptiness of space. It's alive, and it knows we exist. We may have left it in orbit, but it's here now, hidden in our world, an unseen passenger we unwittingly brought back. Whatever we encountered, it hasn't left. It's still out there, waiting, biding its time, slipping into the cracks of reality, searching for its next chance.
If you found yourself trembling with fear and captivated by our journey into the unknown, don't let the darkness end here. Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to join us for more spine-chilling stories and mysteries that lurk beyond the stars. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and remember, some secrets are better left undiscovered.